Okay, you're live and recording. Let's see if we can start this over one more time.
Kevin, are you able to give me host? Oh, okay. Yeah. All right, I believe we are live, ready to go. Thank you again for your patience.
Okay, we are back on the rails again. We will get this attempt number 3. Thank you so much for your patience. First on the agenda is review of minutes from our meeting April 17th. Did everyone get an opportunity to review our minutes? Any comments, any discussion? Anyone like to make a motion for adoption of these minutes?
I'll make that motion.
Motion made. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
So moved. Thank you. Next on the agenda, review of public comment. We do have a public comment that was shared with all members, those in person as well as those attending virtually. The comment was emailed to you. I think everyone, especially with our delay this afternoon, has had an opportunity to review this. Jeff, probably a lot of questions in here that you can address. Do you want to make some comments?
So part of the presentation today includes pre-service training, a few slides. So if it's good for the chair, I'll just do some updates then. We actually had a meeting with PSU today that went really, really well and very easy can hit on some of the topics addressed here.
Very good. Okay, we will do that. Thank you, Jeff. Okay, Jen, I'll turn this over to you.
Absolutely. Thank you, Clark.
Yeah.
All right, so our first item, for action today is a presentation on expanding the availability of Head Start programs at community colleges. And everybody should have a draft report in addition to the slides that we'll be going through. This work was prepared by Chelsea and Andwa, and so I will walk us through the slides, a high-level overview of what is going on in this body, but they are truly the subject matter experts and will help you with their own questions. We can move to the next slide, please, Chelsea. So let me level set first with what this is and its origin story. And so couple of bullets here to kind of help frame the work that is in front of you and that we're seeking an endorsement on today. So during the 2024 General Assembly, Delegate Tran introduced House Bill 984, which called on directing the Department of Education and the Virginia Community College system to provide recommendations on expanding the availability of Head Start programs at community college campuses. This bill, and for those of you familiar with the General Assembly, there are many bills that start but do not necessarily finish or become laws. We have very gentle ways of putting them out to pasture in Virginia, passing them by indefinitely or gently putting them to bed. But it did not pass, but instead the chair of the House Education Committee, Delegate Rasool, sent a letter to the then superintendent requesting that the Early Childhood Advisory Commission evaluate and provide a report on recommendations. Oftentimes when bodies that represent the board or groups such as this that serve as the board's advisor are asked to do work on behalf of you all, often with little objection from those of you who are volunteering your time, the staff will do the work of that and then bring the product of that work to you all for endorsement before submitting it on your behalf. And so there was a little bit of a snafu in getting that letter to the department. But once it was realized last fall that that there was this request from the General Assembly, Tandra and myself and the then superintendent worked with the House Chair and with Delegate Tran to create a timeline that basically would say by this summer, we would provided we received an endorsement for you all on this work on your behalf. And it was pretty explicit and spelling out that we need to look at certain examples, the Head Start centers at New River Community College and Southwest Virginia Community College, and look at what's happening at the national level in terms of the work in the National Head Start Association of Community College Trustees, as well as not explicitly directing any specific action, but noting that stakeholder input would be invaluable to the study. And the VDOE, in response, as I'll describe in a moment, took that as a strongly encouraged, if not mandated, action in terms of making sure that this was not just a research report based on we knew about Virginia or what was happening at the national level, but also reflected stakeholder input from folks on the ground here in Virginia. Next slide, please. With that in mind, led by our executive director of our Office of Head Start Collaboration, in partnership with folks at the Virginia Community College system, we've conducted background research, which you see in the material in front of you, and facilitated 4 engagement sessions with 54 stakeholders. As you might imagine, and huge credit goes to Tandra and Chelsea and our team on kind of getting folks together, making sure that we could provide a 90-minute session, which there was both an effort to create level set with some information about Head Start and community colleges, as well as to hear from folks about what it would take to increase access to Head Start via community campus. 3 of those sessions were based on geography, so trying to divide up the state and work with the kind of multiple ready regions, dividing 9 ready regions into 3 discrete sessions, and then a 4th focused on parents, but was also open to anybody who's not able to attend an earlier session. Again, a 90-minute session, so just to kind of, for you all, as you're thinking about these recommendations, much of which the content of this report comes from those. Imagine first a project overview, general information you see in this report about what we know about Head Start, what we know about the Kids on Campus initiative, what we know about Virginia's community colleges, lessons learned from other states, more detail on the national model, and then a little bit of provide some examples to promote thinking, including the collaboration involving the Head Start program, particularly on the New River Community College campus. Then, like any good focus group, participants were then able to share sort of thoughts about what the opportunities could be here, what were the big benefits, and then what were the big challenges, right? So that if you're kind of producing on your behalf a set of recommendations for our legislator that would kind of cover both what we thought would be possible and should be considered, as well as what some potential challenges and barriers could be. So if we go to the next slide, please. This kind of walks you through, you've got your executive summary, your background, your steps here. If you start really pages 6 rather, through 10, cover what was learned from the session. And so we'll start with, as we always like to do with the strengths-based approach, from the 54 participants across the state, I think there was some excitement about, how do we bring together, supports for kids, right? along with supports for low-income parents who are pursuing greater self-sufficiency right through additional education and may face some challenges around childcare. So I think folks who are really excited about the idea of co-location, making it easier for potentially these younger low-income families to have access to childcare. Oftentimes, they're for those of you who are familiar with are some where our community colleges are located, particularly in rural areas. Those might be kind of equivalent to childcare deserts. Students may already be driving long distances to get to community college, and having childcare right there would be a real benefit for those low-income working families. It also was noted, and I know you're seeing this as what barriers can be for students in completing degrees and or sort of pursuing enrollment can be childcare. And so community college folks and others noted that this could also help increase enrollment if they had co-location of services. Similarly, co-location, according to our stakeholders, could also provide a benefit in terms of having a real live learning location on campus. And I think, some of you who represent higher ed know about this, but having a childcare facility on campus not only benefits students who might be studying engineering or mechanical sciences, but also if you have, and many of our community colleges have early childhood or educational preparation programs, and that would allow real live learning as part of that and kind of create practicums, and that could also be a benefit of the community college as they think about providing, on-site opportunities for folks to do training hours, potential employment, practicum, as well as observations. And even those Head Start educators, right, who are employees and often parents, right? There's a pretty significant overlap with Head Start of where Head Start parents often may work at Head Start grantees, but they could also be community college students. And so just this idea of, if you think about a Venn diagram, some overlap between audiences here and how you could seize on that opportunity through co-location. The other potential opportunities that the group suggested that should be considered are the value of just the resources. So I think there's been a lot of emphasis in recognizing that some of our community college students come from historically disadvantaged populations. And so trying to kind of think about, how do we connect food assistance for community colleges? How do we think about Ladies, if you've ever had the privilege of being on a community college campus and you've used the restroom, there's often a piece of paper that sort of is like, on the back of the stall that gives you advice on how to network other resources. And that could be highly useful for either Head Start educators or Head Start parents. And so this idea of kind of, again, a focused network location supporting our low-income families who are pursuing greater self-sufficiency. For example, and you see examples here, our Head Start leaders who also participated as part of these focus groups, we're talking about how even things like basic phone and internet service, right? So an entire community college campus often has a free Wi-Fi network, and that could be huge for a Head Start parent or Head Start educator in terms of being able to access potential job opportunities and, or be able to apply for child care assistance or to apply for other forms of assistance. And so just realizing in particular the suite of resources that are now typically available at Virginia community colleges, and then thinking about how those could be doubly useful for Head Start parents and Head Start educators. And then similarly around the family support. And again, if you think about if you've read anything, if you've talked to community college folks, it is getting folks enrolled, getting them to stay enrolled, getting them to come to class, getting them to complete are some of the biggest challenges. And you often hear about this in the higher community college space around. It's just really hard to get that job or get that raise if you just did part of community college. And childcare is such a huge barrier, but being able to co-locate these programs, look at how you could maximize these shared resources would be of incredible support for families. I think there's also a note, and I think about whether it's out in the Southwest or South Side, community college campuses just play such an important hub role in rural communities for families. And so kind of recognizing that could be huge in our rural communities where there might not be a one-stop shop where families could access, these resources. And, you know, again, have the 2-year period of Head Start for 3 and 4-year-olds, but a longer period of time really to work with families as they're pursuing greater self-sufficiency and stabilizing, you know, childcare available for the parents while also supporting child development could be huge. And as you all are familiar with, Head Start has those wraparound services. So being able to kind of leverage, you know, both a person who's supporting family support connected to a location that, as we described earlier, has a ton of resources. So overall, and I'll pause here and see if Chelsea or Rhonda want to add anything more about the opportunities, but I think some enthusiasm for recognizing in terms of mission, in terms of resources, in terms of you know, 2 kind of institutions that really benefit low-income working families, that there's some real opportunity if you were to bring these groups together. Rhonda or Chelsea, what would you want to add?
I think you covered it, by and large, but through the stakeholder engagement session, we really felt the enthusiasm and the spirit of collaboration from all of the constituents that participated.
Any questions about the opportunities before I move on to some of the challenges? So as the group engaged, I think it was also important, right, to make sure that a report that you all would be endorsing and sending on to the General Assembly would also reflect where the rubber meets the road or some of the practical challenges around how do you make this happen if there are all these potential benefits. And so huge thanks to the group for also being willing to get real and lay out what they thought some of those challenges are. I think the first one is a little bit of something we've seen in recent years as we've been talked about childcare and community college campuses is you know, getting that right fit and then making sure, right, even though these groups have different missions, right, care of children and supporting families working and educating you know, student parents, is that then figuring out the facilities and licensing presents some complexity. And I know this was an issue that came up last year, and some funding that was dedicated for this purpose, but really figuring out where would be a space that was appropriate for young learners, a space that could be licensed in accordance with our state laws and regulations. And that's a tough one, right? On these campuses in general are trying to get to full enrollment. You know, there's every space and sort of community colleges similar to Head Start grantees tend to be very resourceful with every dollar and figuring out if it had not been originally built to, you know, spaces for little kids with little toilets and some of the other amenities, that could be some real challenges there. And I think the sort of the space one is a big one. I also think we should refer to, you know, different levels of enrollment and sort of create different dynamics at different sites, right? If you're a growing community college, you're probably already crowded in spaces. And if you are an under-enrolled, you might have space, but it may be not in the right, might need some retrofitting before it could be used for a classroom. The other kind of similar logistical challenge that came up is schedule coordination. And so I think this is one where you have 2 ways of doing things that sort of are not a perfect overlap. So there is an overlap in terms of the populations, but as Tondra and our Head Start grantees know, there's a certain number of hours, a certain number of days, a lot of expectation around a service model that comes with Head Start. And that does not neatly align up necessarily with community college class schedules. And so that was, I think, a big one, not insurmountable, but just as community colleges have spent, you know, the last few years really trying to just sort of, you know, play the game of Tetris of figuring out which professor can offer which class at what time, how do we support the needs of working students who might want nights and weekends. You know, that presents a little bit of a puzzle when you think about the kind of when Head Start expects you to offer hours to parents. And so again, there could be a risk that you know, have all your classes at night, and that's when the folks want the practicum, and you need to offer your Head Start right during the day. And so, as well as the kind of during the, generally speaking, the academic year. And so that would probably require some work to figure out when you might want to change when you offer those classes, how to think about, like, what would you do if your child was eligible for Head Start? It went from 9 to 3, but all the courses in your particular major or credential were offered from 4 to 8, right? And you got, that's great for the child and great for you, but there's no coverage, right? Custodial care coverage during that time. So that was a kind of a potential challenge that would require some creative out of the box thinking. Funding and sustainability. I know you're not going to be surprised to see this one coming up, but again, thinking about you would need resources. This is a challenge currently with Head Start in terms of making the dollars go as far as possible, making sure you're getting to full enrollment. In community colleges, also recognize that parents don't have, you know, additional dollars to shell out. They don't have sort of additional dollars. Community colleges do not have the generous endowments that some of our four-year institutions do. And so it would really take kind of new Head Start grants, for example, to be able to do this. There's not a lot of existing grants that are going underutilized. And along with that kind of came institutional capacity. And I think this is something that has come up as folks, you know, and come up, I think, you know, less so maybe with Head Start grantees who are generally kind of focused, but if you are a community college and you're trying to serve all of the needs of your families and you're looking at co-location, at what point does it become challenging to manage the multiple mission and the kind of the scope there, right? Am I an education institution? Am I a care institution? Am I a healthcare institution? Am I a food and nutrition institution? But that kind of idea of how you would find and what it might mean differently for your governance and what your institution needed to support. Even down to things that sort of like, what does a janitorial look like, right? If I've got little kids using a space every day as compared to, you know, that looks different when it is adults using that space, you know, for fewer hours and with less consistency. And then I think the, just as we sort of spoke about a little bit at the beginning in terms of licensing regulations, but I think there's a different expectations. You've got occupancy codes, you've got Head Start program regulations. These are both fairly regulated spaces, and neither institution's regulations were designed with the idea of co-location. Doesn't mean it's impossible, but it would take some work to work through what the different expectations are, where you could get variances or exceptions, you know, and where that would be a challenge. And again, just using the example of, you know, a Head Start organized around parents' coursework rather than the traditional model, potentially could be possible, but would take some work with your, you know, your regional office and the federal government to kind of get flexibility for that. But that would probably make more sense. It makes it's not useful for you if the Head Start program is open 10 to 2 and your classes are in the evening. So with those challenges in mind, and again, appreciate for the group, putting all of that out there so that I think as you all, we hope will want to do is you're advising the General Assembly in a very practical way around here's the opportunity, here are the things that we need some time and effort to work through. I think there's a couple of things or promising strategies that came out of the group as you kind of pivoted and say, okay, what would it take to turn this into action? And so the strategies that the group suggested for us and that we have summarized in the report for you all to endorse and pass on would be the importance of kind of identifying particular entities who would be interested in doing this and thinking about how the state can support in terms of formal partnership agreements, right? And even if you're not ready to open tomorrow or in 3 months, how you could begin to get this in motion through some type of MOUs or cooperative endeavor agreements to kind of begin to clarify roles, understand where there are consistencies and where there might be gaps in terms of roles, responsibility, mission, and kind of compliance. The group also said there would definitely be the need for technical assistance. And so taking, as you sort of see, there's a summary of some of the insights happening at the federal level, what's already happening in Virginia, but thinking about how you would take that, turn that into guidance, think about technical assistance, but some real support, particularly for folks on both sides, people within VCCS who understood kind of what the parameters that community colleges are subject to. And then I think on the Head Start side, making sure that you have Head Start experts to support you. Facilities would be a big one. I think this really would come down to, who has got space, who's got existing space. One of the really big challenges that comes up that I know some of our rural communities know this, there's just not unidentified funding sources out there for capital funds, right? There's not Head Start or CCDF, if at all, for capital funds, right? So unless there is an existing space that's being underutilized, that becomes a real hard, fast barrier to thinking about that. So we did hear suggestions from the groups. I always feel torn about this one because I love the idea of access, but don't love the idea of our kids in trailers, but modular classrooms. Now we have a lot of Head Start grantees, particularly in some of our rural areas where the ability to go up and down in terms of the number of kids served. The most affordable, the most practical way to do that is through modular units, call trailers, modular classrooms, kind of thinking about that. And that's a way to bring it to campus. The air conditioning often works very well in those spaces. I should know they are very cold, generally speaking. And it was ever been a modular classroom. And then the other one, there's a great example of taking an old bowling alley and figuring out how to turn it in the student meeting building. Maybe bowling is not sort of the sport of the future for our generation, for our millennials. But again, sort of really thinking out of the box around how you could get community college leadership to say what spaces may be out there, and then with fresh eyes looking at could you repurpose this for childcare and Head Start in particular. So other key areas sort of to really think through, I think really thinking through shared service models. This could also help on the funding, right? Really thinking about what are the resources, how could we, if we're being charged with doing the same thing, and particularly around the wraparound support for families, how that could be a benefit, whether that's if you can support additional enrollment, how that might lead to additional revenue, what other resources might be out there for community college students. I think working on program design and scheduling, again, sort of understanding, of your student parents, what are their kind of schedules now, right? And how you might design a Head Start program to meet those needs, right? Rather than just take it kind of out of the box Head Start program, which typically operates on a 10-month-a-year schedule and a certain hours a day. Funding sustainability would be key, sort of both thinking about capital and ongoing operating costs. Really where you could leverage Head Start and know that you probably have a good number of eligible families or households on your campus. And then, but what other sources might be? Would you want to think about, for example, a fixed income model that would have not only Head Start parents, but potentially fee for service? Like if all of your families are low or low to moderate income, probably a mixed fee model would not work, right? Because if you're relying on private pay to make up the difference in some of these costs. And your families don't have those resources that will work. And then I think the other key piece, and I think this came up, and I'll turn it back to Chelsea and Tanya and know that there's more that they want to add, but just that there's even within across the 54 participants in the 4 different sessions, such a range of perspectives on this. And I think as somebody who's had the opportunity, and Tanya's visited every one of our Head Start grantees, right? But there's a different flavor, a different culture. Parents are looking for different things, even within the Head Start model. And as somebody who's had the opportunity to visit a number of our community college campuses, those look physically different. They have, been designed to sort of meet different needs of student parents, and the group resoundingly reflected a need to prioritize and really recognize family voice and choice. And so it's really thinking through, if you were going to bring this to a campus, you wouldn't want that decision to simply be based on income eligibility or available space, but making sure that the student parents, that this would be their preferred choice. And that's, I think, important. We think about our public-private parent choice system and recognizing that some families might want Head Start and some families may prefer a childcare subsidy voucher or might prefer to participate in the increased initiative, and really thinking through how we would make sure that was baked into technical assistance going forward, as well as making sure that our legislators understood that would need to be a key ingredient for any successful pilot or initiative in this space. Barbara or Chelsea, what challenges and the strategies, promising strategies, what else would you all add? Securing you all this else.
I would share that from what we gleaned, in the stakeholder engagement sessions, we really felt like this was a forward-thinking approach to how to provide services. So we know Head Start has the most stringent regulatory guidelines when it comes to their guidance and their funding structures, but with facilities being so difficult to secure for many of our grant recipients, we think this could be an innovative learning partnership. But of course, it's going to take careful planning and careful collaborative thought processes in order to implement this. But I think we could be leading the way in as ahead of many states, even though there are some particular partnership models that do exist. This may lend Head Start the opportunity to really think more locally designed options that they can implement across the state. Have anything to add there, Chelsea?
I'll just generally say that, there was really mixed experience, especially among the community colleges when it comes to the idea of childcare on campus, and the conversations often started with folks with less experience or no experience on their campuses, sort of a little bit of more like resistance or want to bring up the challenges and talk about those right away. And yet they all seemed pretty open to hearing from those on the calls that did have some experience and hey, we felt the same way, but actually it wasn't that big of a deal. The concerns around, do we have space that could be adequate for childcare? It's not as complicated as you might think once you kind of get down to sketching out clear roles and responsibilities in your agreements, so just thought that conversation was dynamic and people seemed open to challenging their own immediate assumptions that this wouldn't be possible here.
And I would just add that technical assistance piece. I think we kind of walked through both entities to look at what's beneficial and how this can be shaped. But again, great enthusiasm around it. A lot of thought partners joined us on the calls, and we do have some with some background and experience in operating previous childcare centers for community colleges.
And then at the final piece, just so you all know, in terms of who we're talking about, if you look at page 12, it includes all of the community colleges, so you see broadly representative of the community college system, as well as our Head Start partners, our parent groups, and then our community partners. So huge thanks to our Ready Regions who played a huge role in this, as well as our Head Start Association, involving family councils, which, as you know, each of our Ready Regions are required to have them, and then again, great participation for both Head Start and community college. So I appreciate, as Chelsea just noted, I think there were some kind of questions like, could this be done? How would this be done? I think the other piece, and I think generally speaking, what we've tried to frame, as in this document is, here's what we've heard. There could be an interest in moving forward, but we'd also want you to be thoughtful, right? This, and put another way, this is not saying, the state should mandate Head Start on every community college campus next year, right? This is more around saying there seems to be a potential here. You'd have to think through those implications, thinking about, whether or not there was an interest in a pilot or sort of some way of kind of, if there were a set of partners who were interested, and as Tonga noted, where we could provide the TA, probably the most viable path, the path forward. But that's really not the what is set forth in this body is not necessarily that decision, but just whether or not you would endorse sharing the insights from the 54 stakeholders and their representative organizations as presented in this report to keep the conversation going forward. Let me pause there and see if there's any questions for us from folks around the table or on the Zoom.
I like the idea of this having access. My biggest concern with this is the funding piece, not trying to put that in the room, but given how things are at the federal level, we don't know if we're going to see cuts to Head Start funding and Medicaid, because let's keep in mind, a lot of our students with disabilities, their services, are billed through Medicaid. So my question would be, in considering this, have these partners, and the state consider, what type of funds would be available should we lose that federal funding? Because what I don't want to see is see this implemented. We lose that federal funding and then we lose these spots for families and, jobs for these educators that are going to be managing this classroom.
Yeah, that's a great question, Joe. So I think we're a few steps ahead of that. I think that similar to the sentiment you just expressed, that folks who participated said, the funding would be necessary. And I think practically speaking, there's not necessarily unused Head Start grants in the state right now, right? So like, let's even start before we even talk about, what's happening in terms of the future of Head Start. Like there's not this is not, for example, where there's a pot of Head Start dollars or slots that are both unused and we're trying to repurpose this. So this report goes a few steps even back from there to say that would be necessary, right? You would need new funds. There's not an opportunity for repurposing, and that you would need to think about funding sustainability. I think before you would kind of, make those things. And so again, even the policy strategies really for that emphasis on sustainability, because I think as you just noted, you would not want to, construct a place and then not be able to put kids in it and not, and have them re-sign up and then not be able to complete, the 2-year tutorial experience. I think it's a very well-made point. And again, think of this, your endorsement not as saying, hey guys, go forth and start building tomorrow, but saying that these are the considerations, just as the one that you just raised, Daryl, should be seriously contemplated before action is taken.
And would there be a possibility for like a pilot program with like the colleges that's already have an early childhood program? Would they want to initially be the ones that do it to see how it's going to work before you would implement it across the state?
Yeah, I think that's the general take from both the federal guidance on this, the federal models that were cited, as well as the Virginia grantees of sort of starting small. I mean, there's sort of two ways, practically speaking. And again, I'm speaking hypothetically, this is not what the report is calling for. You'd either have to have a grant, right? Or another grant opportunity would have to become available, of which, there's not any right now, or the state would have to make an investment, right? There's not, there's not a kind of current pot of money could be used. But I think, Gina, that's certainly the reason for emphasizing sustainability, for thinking about, the sort of citing the current examples would be the starting small would be the way to go here.
I just want to comment. So coming from Laurel Ridge Community College, this is a concern, a need, a desire for the students at the school, for the staff at the school.
Yeah.
And it's been an ongoing conversation for us for years.
Yeah.
At the BCCS annual conference, it's something that is spoken about at many, many different meetings and conferences. We're starting small. We have a family study lounge so that students can come in and do their work, access the internet, like you were talking, the resources we have for them, but can bring their children over there.
Yeah.
So I love that this is happening. And yes, there are big hurdles and questions and things that we need to, work through collaboratively, but just.
And that raises an important point. I mean, one thing I should also note, and I know it's in here, and I didn't say it out loud explicitly, but there's also kind of this, in terms of the formal partnership agreements, you would also figure out to what extent is the community college running it directly versus outsourcing it. And so that for the childcare conversation, many community colleges said, I can't do that, right? But I will give us, I will kind of come up where I give a space, or for example, like oftentimes Head Starts will consider that in kind, right? In terms of their local match. And so there are different ways to do this in terms of those agreements. But any way you do it, need to be kind of reflective of that local context. I think even the small steps like you just described are important, I suppose, for figuring out, okay, how do we do this? What does this mean we need to do different way? And lots of different partnership groups could be.
A huge fan of Head Start. I think this is a great idea. I do want to think about more long-term and where the huge gap is for infant toddler care and the conversation around the early Head Start component.
Yeah, no, and so, folks in the book again, I mean, you know, when the department is directed to do something, we generally take it fairly literally. But Vivian raises a really good point. If you look at some of the demand right now, particularly from our low-income working families and our families who might be in community college or in job training, a lot of those are parents of infants and toddlers. And so we did not speak to that because that's not part of the legislative mandate, but that's a really important point to raise.
Jenna, I have a question.
Yeah.
I'm not familiar with Head Start, the federal requirements for childcare, but when a community college or colleges are navigating space, do they also have to figure out outdoor play space? That part of the component also?
Yeah, that's a good one too, right? Yeah.
I just want to throw in our models different from what's really in this report, but we are co-located with Virginia Peninsula Community College in our facility. They're running all their early childhood development courses out of our center, and they actually are also running other courses beside that. So we are not providing childcare. Our models really focused on shared services. It doesn't mean at some point we won't have the conversation about that, but I will tell you it has only been 5 months since we've all got in the building, but it's been a great experience. So, which leads me to think a wonderful idea. Yeah.
I think there would be some work that could be done from the Ready Region level to coordinate a lot of partners together and not just Head Start to solve the early Head Start issue, extended day, childcare services for families that don't qualify, all of that in sort of this, we like to call it beautiful model. This model that has every funded slot inside the model. And we think that that's really the way to make everything work. It's very difficult to get all those parties to the table, but I still think it's a beautiful model. If we could get that, pilot kind of down.
I think particularly right in some of our rural communities where there's sort of one entity that does that, right? And so if you truly can get them in one location, particularly with some of the transportation challenges for rural communities. Because if you live here, drive 30 minutes to your community college, right? Drive another 15 to the childcare, right? Then drive another 20 to your placement. Like that's just all over the place. And co-locating that make a huge difference, particularly with our rural communities also don't tend to have like public transportation. Chelsea, any questions in the chat or from our Zoom folks?
Nope. We're good.
So what would next steps from this recommendation be? What's the intention for the next thing that would come from this report?
That's a great question. So what this is a little bit unique for us. There's all variety of ways in which we respond to requests from the legislature. This one in particular, what we would do is seek your endorsement. We would then finalize this. We put a cover letter on this and we would send it to Delegate Rasul. We would also send a copy to Delegate Tran and make sure that her chief of staff was aware of it. And from there, it really is verbally back and forth, right? So that they would have the author of that. Now you could see, they could take a variety of actions, whether there's another effort to have a bill, for the General Assembly, often bills come back in different forms, or there could be a budget item, there could be resolution. So, but it would be, there's no further action required of the department. And so we would package this up, send this over, and then wait and get a better understanding of how the General Assembly would want to proceed. Need a motion to endorse.
I will motion.
I will second.
We have a motion, we have a second. Any further discussion? All those in favor, please say aye. Any opposed? So moved.
Excellent. So what we will do, thank you all, what we will do from here is we'll put that cover letter on. We'll send it over. And then I think this is a new thing for us because normally once you endorse something, like those are things that typically go to the board, right? It gets sent on. So you sort of see how that moves forward because that will be less visible to you. What we can do, and I'll ask Becca and she'll see the follow-up, is just once we've sent that over to Delegate Rasul, just make sure that we send that email so you have a final copy for your record of the report.
Can I make a note? I'm so sorry, I should have done this before the vote. New River Community Action is listed under the community colleges. It should be under the Head Start.
Oh, perfect. Thank you.
And Mountain Empire, College is on it twice.
Our prize for each one.
Only because I was looking for my Head Start. So I was like, I was on the call, so I knew they were there. Where are they? There we go.
Excellent. All right. So that was our one action item. Huge thanks. And again, thank you all, informed today, allowing us to move that forward. Our next items are updates. I'm going to turn it over to Jeff to provide a brief update on, where we are in pre-service training. Again, as a reminder, this has also been something that has come up in legislation in the past in terms of charging the department with addressing this. And then I think as Clark noted earlier, Jeff, once you get through your update, also there's things to comment on related to public comment that we received.
Fantastic. So in order to be brief, sometimes I have to talk quickly. If I need to slow down, let me know. Give you a quick history because I think it's important on this topic to remember the history. 2017, Department of Social Services entered into a contract with Penn State University to construct a pre-service training for subsidy providers. Key to know, this was originally constructed for subsidy providers. Partly partnering with PSU because they had a lot of experience working with other states and developing this training related to the Child Care Development Block Grant. So fast forward 2021, new regulations for child day centers come into play that require child day center staff to take the pre-service training. Mind you, a pre-service training that was originally designed just for new subsidy providers. Since that time, we've heard, right about that same time is when child care came over from DSS to DOE. We started hearing rumblings, some loud, some not quite so loud. We really need to look at this and update it. So we started the process of reviewing that in the midst of doing CDC regulations, general procedures, background checks. What transpired late 2023 into 24, JLARC did a study related that referenced the pre-service training. We had House Bill 1024 that came into this saying that we need to re-examine this. So 2024, we spent a lot of effort getting feedback. We sent well over 18,000 emails to those who work in childcare saying, please let us know your thoughts about this, about the pre-service. We got 53 results back. We had 8 listening sessions around Virginia over the course of the past in 2024 and had about 9 people participate in those. Based on the feedback that we had assessed just anecdotally, information from JLARC, information from the surveys, information from staff, public comment on the regulations, talking to different people, here in the group with ECAC. We got with PSU over the last 6 months to talk about how do we move forward. And so what we kind of summarize is what's up on the screen regarding that training needs to be more age appropriate and tailored to the type of childcare that it is. Is it center-based versus home-based? What we also heard was we need to cut back on the subsidy information. And so what we ended up doing in talking with PSU, their experience working with other states, feedback here, is that there are certain things that we must address because the feds say we need to do it. And those are what we call the core components. Now, the core components are addressed differently related to whether you're serving an infant or you're serving a school ager, whether you're doing an infant in a family day home or serving an infant in a licensed center or a religious exempt center. So basically what we're doing, and I'll talk a little bit more about the details here in a couple minutes because we had a great meeting with PSU, is that the core components will be addressed in a core content area that everyone must take if you are a new person to childcare. You do not need to continue to take this over and over. You can take this with you to different places. And then the training will be tailored to your area of expertise or area in which you will be serving. Birth to 5 school agers. If it's birth to 5, the content will be tailored for centers or tailored for a family day home. And so that's what you see up here on the screen. Important to note, we will be translating all of these into Spanish. Next, please. So a couple of key updates related to this in terms of kind of the big picture. First off, right now, the training is 10 hours. If you take all the different components listed on the previous screen, it's going to come out to be 10 hours. But we do not see most individuals needing that. So the amount of training needed in terms of hours will be reduced. One of the things we had to navigate is how do we move forward with updating this training? Because we can't just stop the training and go look for somebody else. We got to continue this. So the way the contract with PSU works, we had one more year that we could renew. So we renewed the contract with PSU. We got everything signed. I think we have one more signature to do before the 30th. And we will continue the current process through December. And then the plan right now is to January to have the work that we're doing come into play. So what we're really excited about, and I'm going to transition a little bit into some of the details, is the work that we're doing with PSU. One of the things I want to kind of frame the rest of what I'm going to say with is we told PSU, we want you to design this training with 2 people in mind. An 18-year-old high school student that just graduated and is working in a 2-year-old room, or an 18-year-old college freshman that's coming back from college and is going to work in a school age program like a summer camp or something along those lines. So what that allowed PSU to do is to step back and say, most of this training has always been designed for a new childcare provider. So it's geared towards the person who's making decisions about subsidy, about setting up classes. And what we're saying is the majority of people that are going to be taking this are people who are brand new to childcare. What do the teachers need to know? What do the aides need to know if they don't have any experience whatsoever in working in childcare? And so that really is giving PSU a new way of looking at this. And we have members of Aaron's team that's coming in that are used to doing training, that are used to working with providers. And so we're pulling in the resources that we need to move this forward. So some of the things that you're going to be reading in the public comment are absolutely applicable. You know, we don't want an infomercial on subsidy. You know, we really want to make sure that this is tailored to Virginia. We're going to actually be taking video here in Virginia, showing quality and showing what we can do here in Virginia. We are going to make sure there is some things that will be cut. There's probably going to be a few things here that might be added. You know, regardless of whether you are a teacher or provider, you need to at least know what subsidy means, because part of it is you're moving into an area where subsidy is important, but also there are federal requirements related to certain things. We're going to tailor the amount that you need to know based on who you are, center-based, family home-based, and the age of the children that you're going to be worked with. One of the things that's written here about data safety, we're very confident in PSU's practices regarding data. We will go back to them just to make sure that their policies are up to date, make sure that everything is going along according to the contract that we currently have with them, as well as just general safety and security related to data regarding people in Virginia.
We also can, Jeff, and I know we did this for Blink P5 around some of the discussions around classroom lists, is, you know, everything that we have to do is subject to a variety of data security and privacy requirements. It's often buried in the resources that we have, but we can pull together kind of a one pager on how that, you know, what sort of contractual requirements PSU is subject to, what it means to work with the state and be a contractor of the state. As you might imagine, the terms and conditions on many of our agreements are not short. But I think there's something that's useful to have that in one place around, if one of your potential teachers says, hey, where is my data going? And the point that Ms. Slack raised in the comment here.
Any questions about the pre-service training?
So after the contract stop,
Mhm.
let's say
Right.
in December.
Yeah.
We are paying for the next certain amount of years, or how will that work?
Yeah, so the question that after we do the update, the question will be, what is it we want to do moving forward? And allowing that to determine whether or not we can go through, can we just, if we're getting a lot of good feedback about the updates, is there a way we can contract about a learning management system? One of the things that DOE is currently struggling with is, what does a learning management system look like for schools? What does it look like for childcare providers? Part of the struggle right now is part of our contract with PSU is about hosting the training, not just creating the training. And so the department I'm working with our assistant superintendent who's in charge with all this of like, what can we do? Because one of the things we're doing with our current contract with PSU, if we are creating video, then we own the video. Whereas the previous contract, if we were to get the content from PSU, we would get a PDF with just the information. And then we'd be starting from scratch, doing that. We have a great community college system, working with our community college system, and we're doing great things with UVA. We will assess all of that based on need, not just, not working with PSU.
Then who pays for the training?
We do. It's fun. Yeah.
Through CCDF.
Okay.
Yeah. It is a CCDF required training. So as Jeff was describing the sort of phase in of the training, that correlates with the timeline of when the state had to meet certain requirements associated with the CCDF reauthorization in 2014, and then the final rule that was issued in 2016. There were like a rolling set of deadlines leading up all the way to 2018 or 19 that, the state had to hit certain milestones along the way. And that's kind of how this came to be on the timeline Jeff was describing.
So we pay for the content, Holly, and then oftentimes talking about, so the
Centers are paying payroll
Yeah, paying people.
for
That's-
hourly your teachers to watch for 10
Yeah, you
hours.
have 10 hours of training on clock,
Yes,
so senators have to pay that,
yes.
just a lot.
Thank you.
Yeah. But there's
And I
no
had to
money
give
to
you the
reimburse
criminal
that.
record section.
Yeah. That's nonsense.
So if providers that are participating in the subsidy program can receive payment for a certain number of days of planned closure. Our current functionality in our system limits that to the 11 sort of like pre-programmed holidays that are in the system, and then plus an additional 4 days of the provider's choosing. When we move into the new attendance tracking system, providers will be able to choose any 15 days they want to be paid for planned days of closure. And that could be for everybody's off, that could be for staff development days. But no, the department does not have like a unilateral fund that covers professional development, like time for educators. But it is built into the ways in which we reimburse for services in publicly funded programs. Because there's also, so in addition to paying for explicit days where entire facilities are closed, the expectation that providers need substitutes to cover staff time is baked into the way that we estimate the cost of care. Of course, that then only applies if you are participating in a subsidy program for a mixed delivery, and then, is only if associated with the children, right, the number of slots that you have that are covered by that public funding source. So if your program is only serving a couple of kids, and the rest of your tuition structure isn't fully kind of accounting for that, and that also, presumes that you have the substitutes that you have, right, in order to be able to.
And employees have 90 days to get this 10-hour training. So what centers, I think, typically try to do is spread that expense out across the years.
And with the new regulations, this will count towards annual training hours. So you don't have to have the pre-service training and then turn around and have another 10 hours on top of that. This will count toward their annual training. And the thought process is, especially in the season where unfortunately, and I'll use a term, people are hiring based on need, not that I gotta have somebody. They might not necessarily be the person I would ideally pick, but I gotta have somebody. What do we do? How do we make sure that we as a state are doing training to give them a basis of knowledge before they step into those classrooms? And that's the challenge that we're asking ourselves and constantly saying, in this training, that question has got to be answered. Is this what's needed to give people enough that they can step in that classroom and we're comfortable with them stepping into that classroom for the first time ever?
Two thoughts. One, what is the review process? The comment person had said, do you all review it? Does somebody hear the content?
Yeah, so it'll be run through my office. It's going to be run through Aaron's office, who does curriculum review and training review. PSU is, again, contracts with many states. So there's also a wealth of knowledge that has gone through. It'll be matched up with caring for children. There'll be research based baked into that.
Okay.
And then there's also just part of this is just the contractual process of making sure we got a good product from a contractual standpoint for our procurement folks.
Do we know if there is any content related to working with children with IPP?
Off the top of my head, I'm not in that. One of the things we did talk about, is just making sure, especially with we can call it whatever we want to, level of trauma of children that are coming into care, working in, trauma informed. But working with children with, special needs is something, I can't tell you off the top of my head the percentage, but it's definitely something we have on our radar.
Right. Thank you.
It's available for anybody, right?
Yeah, it's free of charge.
Yeah, right. I did it when I first came to Virginia. I mean, if you were to do this, I think you would note many of the concerns that Ms. Slack raised. But that is, the general idea is it is available for everyone, and would continue to be available for everyone. I think, as the team has reiterated, it is the floor, right, not the ceiling in terms of a baseline requirement. I think a reorientation towards teachers. I think one of the big challenges, I mean, you all know this across our public-private parent choice system, is there's a ton of variation. And so trying to kind of strike this right balance of what is the content that everybody needs. I think this new model would delineate between family childcare and childcare, as well as what came out loud and clear. It's the sort of the difference in ages and the difference for those who are serving school age only. As Jeff noted, I think there's a general desire, I think we struck a balance in the revised regulations around some hours. There's quite a bit of center discretion and family childcare discretion after this initial 10, right? The 16 hours each year annually are totally up to centers. That is not how it works in every state. In Louisiana, for example, every sort of vendor training had to be approved. Not my favorite. Again, I think these are necessary improvements. It will then be out there for the world to kind of, kick the tires, offer feedback again. And then I think, as you noted, Holly kind of coming back and sort of saying, is this worth? Do we want a even more significant change? What would that look like in terms of, government procurement? And then kind of also phase that in, because this is very readily available. And, I would say there's also quite a bit of variation how much time it will actually take to complete it. And so that, making sure that we're not, we've also put sort of some value around some of that discretion. So trying to kind of balance between the different perspectives here, but definitely some of these changes are must do.
Two other quick things. So based on the new child day center regulations, this training could also count in some ways toward becoming lead teacher qualified. So there's lots of trying to balance time with things moving forward. And at the risk of overemphasizing, the comments that we received, those 53 comments, the comments from JLARC, 95% of them was about too much subsidy information and not being age and stage appropriate enough. We had very, very little comments related other than that, except for a 1 or 2 off here and there. So just want to kind of frame the changes we are making is what 98, 99% of people said need to be changed. That we did not get a lot of information pushback related to data or the content itself. You know, it's like, hey, understanding they did a nice balance of this is what's kind of required. These are kind of some best practices. But again, really honing in on what is it that you need to know about diapering and playground safety and communicable diseases. What are these bases that a brand new person stepping into an infant, toddler, preschool, school age room needs to know?
Will there be any information about Virginia specific things like BPD5 and curriculum use?
Yeah, so we're going to walk that line and just put our toe in that.
Yeah.
Part of that is because, again, the brand new 18-year-old, and it doesn't, you know, they need to know terms.
Right.
You know, so we'll kind of talk a little about that. Sow some good seeds, but we have this amount of time before we put you in with infants, toddlers, preschoolers,
Right.
and stuff.
I just wanted to make sure that you did exactly that. Just
Right.
say the words so that it's not the first time they heard them when the observer shows up. Man,
Well, so just real,
Yeah.
if I, one more second. So like, for example, there's a whole training on child abuse and neglect, Mayday reporters. You know, that's a whole separate training that we have. But we want to mention it here for that new person coming in. So it's like, oh, I'm now ready. It's like, oh, you're a starter. You know, these are the things, you know, that will be coming up. You'll need to learn about medication if you choose to do medication or things like that. So again, kind of walking those lines of introducing topics because they need to be introduced so that we can grow them. But it's just that it's like, I just need to know what I'm doing on day, you know, 1 through 90. Then we can work for the rest.
I think that's good.
Question. So the care pre-service, if you have a teacher that changes settings, so if they go from a daycare center staff to a family home staff, whichever 10 hours you started is the one that you do your renewal on.
So the renewal's not specific. So the renewal is just renewal regardless of what you do. Now, whether that might change after we do this, we would look into. We did a recent update for the renewal, just to kind of, that was a low hanging fruit that we were able to do quickly. We will reassess that once we get this in. The current 10-hour would transfer wherever, but that's something we'll need to look at, especially if I did my pre-service and I didn't have any, you know, infant toddler care or any birth to 5, then I might need to go get that Part B, you know, kind of thing. So will it transfer if it's appropriate? Absolutely. Somebody might need to go back and do a little bit more if they don't have that experience.
I guess the other question I would have is, how much of that pre-service training, because I know Sandy had mentioned children, you know, that already have IEPs or IFSPs, but what about, you know, identifying any children with, you know, suspected disabilities and like how to communicate that to families? I think that'll be crucial, you know, especially dealing with this age group.
So the difficulty is I'm gonna let you and Clark fight because I'm gonna have to add an extra hour to that. And that's the hard part about this. And that's where really, you know, the tension comes in is what is the basis? What is the basis without having them sit through 24 hours of training? And so much of this is what the federal government has said regarding the block grant, that it's about 10 areas these are core. And so those are what we have to do. And that's our guide. And then we pepper it with maybe a little bit of class and talk a little bit about this. There is the disabilities and things like that that's baked into that. Again, but part of it is I'm hoping these 18-year-olds, and these are just easy examples, aren't the lead teacher. You got the lead teachers that know these things. But even if they are maybe the lead teacher for a summer camp program, is very different than a lead teacher for a toddler, because that, by the time we get to summer camp, I mean, it's a different related to disabilities and assessments and things like that.
I think those conversations, very important conversations, would probably take place from the beginning and not some baseline discussion of the child.
And that's the key. Whereas before, this training was for new providers, so you had to give them a lot of stuff. They're new providers. And it's like, that's not what this is geared for. We in licensing, we have phase 1 training for new providers. We have phase 2 training for new providers. You're on a conditional, we're working with you. And so we're shifting our training and preparation focus. And it's like, we'll deal with the providers at this level. This just needs be for the brand new people to childcare.
It also should just be noted, I mean, we've covered some of the bare minimum, but if you think about what this group reviewed related to all the policies that each center is required to have, right? I mean, I think that also represents trying to strike a balance where the state is saying, I need you to have a policy around families and this and that, but we're not saying that they have to be exactly the same policy, right? So we want to be careful that we don't then contradict ourselves by saying, you know, presenting a policy where there might be a center-specific policy. So the team thought about, again, sort of stripping out some of those pieces and making sure that we're not in a conflict between our regulations and where we said there's provider discretion around policy and what this training is. And I would think less around, obviously, the requirements around IEPs or IMSPs, but then how you communicate with parents probably looks pretty different across sites.
I think based on what Daryl just said though too, there is some fundamental information that I think the direct service providers do provide, whether they're branding, whatever. What's the difference between developmental monitoring and developmental screening? And they're the ones that usually do developmental monitoring, and they're right in that class with that child. And there are some wonderful resources that child care centers, family child care centers use. We it's only 45 minutes with them to give them that content. So again, I would advocate that they're saying for something along those lines. How do I monitor and go in there and talk to families because I've seen this, and this, and not just, I just got a feeling that.
Yeah. Any Chelsea questions on the Zoom? Great feedback.
No questions.
I did mention, will be on that, like classroom management.
So as it currently stands now, the $400,000 contract is for the development, and that's what we'll be paying next year, starting in January. Will be the development of the course and then hosting the course on the PSU learning management system, whatever they use. And so one of the things that we're in discussion, so, you know, what does it look like once this is developed? Is there a way to transition into a different system to save $300,000? It just kind of depends on, and, you know, we've been in a lot of discussions just about the child abuse and neglect recognition training, you know, how much we're paying for that, how much we're paying for daily health observation training, how much we're paying for translations, you know, all of these are, we're trying to figure out, is there a way that we can bring them in-house, you know, through Canvas. For those who are familiar with Canvas, it's used, you know, by so many school systems. There's a way that we as childcare can use that. So all of this is on the table and being constantly discussed. Right now, we need to stick with what we have until we can kind of get through the next 6 to 12 months. But we're excited. It was a really good meeting today. I think everybody's excited. PSU is excited about they think our methodology is right at one point, and they foresee other states using our model to kind of do this moving forward.
All right, thank you, Jeff. Thank you, team. Thank you for the feedback, and again, more to come here in terms of some of these changes, getting feedback, and Jeff alluded to we continue to be open to what is the best way to host and to make this available as the baseline for entering teachers. We wanted to moving on here to provide an update on where we are as we come out of the General Assembly. So we typically do this each year and making sure that this body understands, even if there's not a specific action, we're not asking for an action from you today, but just what has happened as it relates to some state decisions, and activity related to early childhood. I'll speak briefly about the 2025 commission, and our new out of school time work group, for which you all received an email about. We'll talk a little bit about what's in the state budget and legislation, and then also give you an update on waitlists. Please, one more. Just as a reminder, you all are the body established in statute that advises the Board of Education. So any policy that goes to the board related to early childhood, or where you're explicitly named, as you were in the letter from the House Education Chair, comes to you. Separately, state law 2 years ago established a commission that is looking explicitly at early childhood financing, and the key difference beyond your different charges is the presence of legislators. And so it gets complicated, but when you have a body advising the board of a gubernatorial agency, that's slightly different than a body that includes not only gubernatorial and cabinet level staff, but legislators as well. Just as this is the charge of that group, slightly different from the charge of this group. And if we go, Chelsea, to the next slide, wanted to highlight for you that additional acts have been made of this group. So just at a very high level, the commission was created. The commission supported legislators, childcare providers, folks coming together around the table to grapple with, at that time, 2 years ago, the potential federal fiscal funding cliff, right? The fact that all the pandemic dollars are going away, that in part led to some pretty significant state investments in that establishment of a specific section in the budget that I talked with you about last summer. Last summer, the commission met and tackled some outstanding pieces of legislation that had not been passed, as well as a kind of month by month grappling with the wait list and the extent to which there was additional unmet parental demand for childcare, for mixed delivery, and for Virginia Preschool Initiative. This year, it will continue to grapple with some of those concepts. And in addition, it's sort of similar to what you just did, which is where a bill had not been passed. Another letter was sent to the commission from the money committees, asking them to look at 3 pieces of legislation that did not go through. House Bill 2538 from Delegate Bulova, which we call for a funding formula for slots across Virginia's publicly funded programs, including BPI, mixed delivery, and child care subsidy. That would account for family demand, growth, and economic development. House Bill 1959 from Delegate Bennett Parker around prioritizing families for waitlist slots who are in households of childcare educators, and then House Bill 1972 from Delegate Gardner, which kind of sets out an aspirational vision for a public-private parent choice system and thoughts about kind of how to increase and maintain capacity across the system. There were also language not related to bills, but buried in our lovely, ever-growing Virginia budget, that we grow in letters as much as we grow in numbers. We would like to see more growth in numbers rather than just letters, but we'll take both. Recommendations on out of school time and really thinking through health, safety, access, and quality for our school age program, which is significant. Number of our publicly funded kids are relying on childcare subsidy, thinking about how we maximize all of the available resources and, kind of adjust for regional cost of living, and then specifically asking the commission to look at attendance requirements. So that is some of the things that Beck will talk about in a second, as we really grapple with how to make the dollars go as far as possible, looking at co-payments, job requirements, working requirements, and looking at kind of attendance to make sure that families and households were taking the greatest advantage of slots if thousands are on wait lists. So that's the work of the commission. There are places, so let's talk a second with school age workers, where we're gonna seek your assistance. They are open meetings. You can virtually watch them. You can come and sit and watch them if you want, but we just try to kind of make sure that the two groups know what you're up to in terms of these sort of distinct but related charges that you both have set forth for you in Virginia statute. Very briefly, if we can go to the out of the school age or the out of school time work group. So we had a section of the budget and then the enactment language in Senate Bill 1084 that called on the department to generate recommendations related to the health and safety of children in school age care, as well as addressing unmet demand and thinking about access and quality, cost of quality for school age care. We are combining those two charges and doing a three in-person sessions this summer. So it's a temporal work group, different from this body that you guys are sort of last of perpetuity. This is a little bit more short-term in nature, but I wanted you to know, because the ECAC and the commission are so focused on birth to 5, the legislature recognized the importance to bring together a broader and different set of stakeholders. We met earlier this week. I had a really productive conversation, level setting where we are in Virginia and starting to get some insights on our strengths and our challenges. We'll meet in July to tackle national models and best practices, discuss the future vision, and then in response begin to take the broad conversation and hone that into specific priorities for health, safety, quality, and access. If we can go to the next slide, Chelsea, the key thing I would sort of say, which is distinctive for this group as related to another work group you're familiar with, the CDC regulations, when we do something pretty similar on the Family Day regulations, those, like, if for those of you who participated, right, for 20 hours, like line by line, going through, bringing very, very specific recommendations back to this body. This work group is in a different place. There has not been a forum and setting for kind of broad-based recommendations. And there's a lot of perspectives represented around the table. And so what we're trying to do is work with the various stakeholders to see if there's a desire to come together and make some broader recommendations. So less of like, this is a specific piece of legislation or a specific regulation change, but a broader set of recommendations that we in turn would take to the commission and submit to the General Assembly to inform the 2026 session. This, again, no action needed from you, but wanted you to be aware of these. And again, you're observing at any point, and we'll just kind of keep you up to speed. Help you learn.
Any legislators?
Not in that, not named. Yeah. I'm going to talk briefly about the high level dollar amounts in the budget and then turn it to Becca for policy shifts. But we have been sharing, and I know some of my Ready Region colleagues have seen some version of this slide before, but just wanted to highlight, there's just a real excitement. There's the challenges too, but a real excitement in as we get closer to July 1st of 2025, it's a milestone of the largest ever state investment in early childhood. A total of $462 million. As a point of reference, that was much, much less, closer to $75 million back in 2018, 2019. And as you see in this chart, those dollars are translating directly into many more Virginia children being served based on our public-private parent choice model. This, and even an increase from last year in terms of $24 million for child care subsidy, for which we had sort of historic wait list there. This number is even higher than 12,000 as of June. We're up to about 13,000. But we will be able to take these resources by making dollars go farther, as Becca will describe, and some more dollars in the system. But we will have nearly 48,000 slots available for FY26 for child care subsidy, nearly 25,000 for the preschool initiative, and 2,600 for delivery. If you go back to pre-pandemic, that was, that represents a really significant increase. So the first column here is what's available for next year. Second column is just the up from last year. So you see we are serving more kids than we did last year. but the really dramatic increase to the tune of 37,000 more kids is up from 2019. So I know that many around the room and on the Zoom would like it to be more, but just wanted to represent and sort of mathematically recognize how many more kids, 27,000 more kids in childcare subsidy, 7,000 more 3 and 4 year olds at the preschool initiative, and 2,400 more kids on mixed delivery. And those are just double digit, if not triple digit percent increases from where we were just a few years ago. And if you think about this combined with the fact that, there's nearly 130,000 kids who are served in our publicly funded sites, right, including private pay parents, that we are truly representing a quarter, if not then closer to a third of the system. So huge step forward for Virginia. If you go to the next slide, this gives you the specific dollar amounts. Again, to be into the 9 digits versus the 8 digits is a huge accomplishment for the state. And as we've talked about before, we are now 2/3 state funded for childcare subsidy. And that is just a really big deal. There are very few states. It's hard to quantify exactly which, because states often sort of blend these dollars in their public presentation. But, not many states are funding their childcare subsidy programs to the tune of mixed delivery and DPI are 100% state funded. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Becca who's going to talk a little bit more about the shifts. So in addition to new dollars, talked about the $24 million new dollars, we're also making the dollars go further. And that is why we're able to serve more kids in every systems. VPI is not, VPI requires the local match, so there's no federal funding for VPI, but there's state dollars. Yes.
So as Jenna described earlier, the commission has had several kind of shifting areas of focus over the course of the last couple of years. So in the first kind of year of its inception, they were really focused on that fiscal cliff that Jenna was describing. And last year, they were really focused on waitlists, right? That the significant state investment in FY25 allowed us to hold steady, right? But it didn't necessarily account for significant growth. And so that required us to initiate waitlists in the subsidy program and in mixed delivery, and we'll give a status update on those here shortly. But the members of the commission spent a great deal of time kind of weighing, right, what is possible to help make state funding that is available go a little further to serve some additional children off the wait list. And one of the areas where there was some general consensus is that it is, within reason to ask families to pay a little bit more in order to allow some families that are currently going unserved, meaning that they are either foregoing work or education opportunities while they're waiting for a childcare slot. Some of them might be paying full price at a childcare program, or some of them might be choosing a setting that is not super safe or high quality, and potentially something that is very informal, but they have no other choice because that is all that they can afford without childcare assistance. And so the co-payment scale will change going into effect on July 1st. We have a little bit of a phased-in approach where the change in scale will start right away for anyone that's new to the program, is enrolling for the first time. Families that are currently on the program have a little bit of heads up so that the change can be phased in a little bit later, and they get some notice so that they can make informed decisions, right, for their families. The scale is going to stay a per child fee structure. So for those of you that recall how the program worked back pre-pandemic, before we waived co-payments for about 18 months, the scale previously was based solely on a percent of income. And it was as your income increased, the percent of your income went up. And it ranged from 2% of income as soon as you earned any money, up to 10% of income at the very top of the exit eligibility level. When we changed co-payments in 2023, we moved to a per child fee scale, meaning you pay based on the number of children that you have enrolled in the program and your income. So that structure is going to stay the same, largely due to the kind of administrative lift that it takes to make changes to the system. But it is getting us close to this 5% of income that is directed under the budget. And so, Chelsea, if you'll jump ahead to the next slide. This is a sort of comparison of what the FY25 scale is, will be compared to the 26 scale. What's important is that while you can see that the per child fees are generally increasing across the board for all families, the actual percent of family income at which co-payments are capped goes down. So that means that previously families would pay a maximum of 7% of their income, which is the federal affordability threshold. But beginning July 1 and kind of in those phased introduction periods or implementation periods, the new threshold will be 5% of family income. So some families are going to see an increase in their co-payments. A smaller number of families are actually going to see a decrease. But no matter what, no matter what the kind of per child level is in each of those cells up on the screen, the most a family would pay is 5% of their income. Next slide. So one of the other shifts that the commission generally agreed was a kind of reasonable a change to ensure that we're prioritizing working families and getting families that are really in need of services off the wait list is to time limit the amount of time that families can be eligible for services when they're looking for work. So this was actually originally recommended by JLARC in 2023. Jeff mentioned the child care study earlier. JLARC had recommended this. This is something that has been kind of raised to us by local departments of social services for several years. But we felt that it was important to allow some time, right, for the Commonwealth, for our families to recover coming out of the pandemic. And by all accounts from our data, most families that were entering the program with job search moved into employment in the following year. And so, but recognizing that we do have these significant wait lists, ensuring that we are prioritizing the slots that are available for those that are actively seeking work was an important shift at this moment in time. And so beginning July 1, families will have 90 days to gain employment while they are receiving childcare assistance. If by the end of that 90-day period, they do not have verification that they're either working or enrolled in school, they'll have 30 days to provide all the required documents, and then they'll be phased off the program if they don't provide that. They have the option to also request a one-time extension of another 90 days. And that is, if you'll go up to the next slide, Chelsea, that 90 days is really in order to allow for families that are, making a real good faith effort to look for work, but just need a little bit more time. I think any of us that have been on the job market during a tough time, either in your life or, economically, like right now, it takes time to get a job. And having childcare is a really important part of being able to get a job. And so that one-time extension will kind of account for situations where something happens outside the family's control, a medical event, right? There's some sort of random, natural disaster or something that prevents their ability from being able to pursue or accept an offer of employment. Or they might be kind of at the end of that process, right? They have just completed some interviews and they're waiting to hear back if they got the job. Maybe they have an offer that's contingent on background checks or a drug screening or reference checks. And so they just need that little bit of extra time to kind of tie up all of their loose ends, provide the appropriate documentation, and then they move into employment. And their kind of conditional approval becomes a full 12 months of eligibility. So we're working with our local departments to provide kind of all of the details that they need to be able to review and consider and approve those extension reasons. But this was a really important component of the budget language. The General Assembly explicitly directed us to allow for these extensions and for us to define what it meant for families to experience this kind of extraordinary circumstances that would require more time. We're hopeful that this will make a big difference for those that, again, just need a little bit of extra time in order to be able to gain employment. Next slide, Chelsea. And so, while there are no direct language changes related to parental activities or co-payments in the mixed delivery section of the budget, there's language that ties the mixed delivery co-payment scale and the activity requirements to subsidy. So anytime there is a change in the subsidy section of the budget related to parental activities and co-payments, mixed delivery changes too. So we've been working closely with the ECF and with Ready Regents to make kind of appropriate changes for mixed delivery. I think as you all may have heard us say before, programs operate a little differently by design. And so there are some kind of slight nuances to the ways in which we're implementing these policy shifts in mixed delivery. But similarly, they'll have a new co-payment scale that goes into effect September 1, which is the same date that it goes into effect for all families in subsidy, no matter kind of when they've entered the program. And then again, families that are in mixed delivery will have 90 days of eligibility to look for work when they're entering the program or having their eligibility renewed.
Are centers tracking that?
In collaboration with the Ready Regions, and I bet Susan, you might be even better positioned to talk about what that might look like. And there's some variability in how that looks.
Each Ready Region, it depends on who handles the eligibility verification. Some Ready Regions do it themselves. In my region, we let the centers do it. And then they just send us a form that says, yes, I'm the one that verified this person's eligibility. These are the criteria that I used, and they send that to us as the Ready Region. Other Ready Regions do it, their teams do it, so they'll have to go back and check in with the family at the 90-day point.
Is there any way that, since the pieces centers will be doing the paperwork that ESS uses to track their 90 days, be provided to make delivery providers? See what I'm saying? Like,
Yeah, so it's a little different with subsidy because the case management system is automated and the family goes directly to that local worker. So, we had to make all of these policies just require changes to our IT system. And so the new kind of way that the system will work is the workers will receive automated notifications when a case is coming up on the 90-day window. And the system also automatically generates notices to families. So they get a letter telling them like, hey, you're at the end of this period, it's coming up. Here's how you submit your documentation. We can certainly provide all of the language, and we've been working closely with Amy and Abigail and team on the DPCF side to make sure that we are kind of aligning language where appropriate. But yes, it's just a slightly different structure and a bit more manual for mixed delivery compared to subsidy.
As we shift into the legislative action, I think you might say, well, what were we just talking about legislation and we weren't. And so I just want to kind of echo again, I think it's important for this body to understand some of the really significant structural shifts here in recent years. With state investments, it means that you have a section of the state budget, right? And we're really appreciative to House Appropriations for kind of creating that as section 12510. With state investments, if you look at the previous budget, there's jokes about letters and numbers aside, right? There's an explicit amount, and then there tends to be language about that. And in some places, the budget is very, very short. And then in places like the BPI's, but it's like this length, right? And so what it ends up being is functionally policy, right? And it is critically important, right? Because it's a really big shift to have mixed delivery, which is in one section, BPI, which is in another, childcare subsidy, which was completely absent in the state budget, is now all there, and then some really important implications for policy and practice are also there, right? That Becca just described to you. And I say that, you know, again, if it's sort of how it's affecting constituents, whether it's, you know, if it's thinking about, well, how we would do this differently, covered in the budget in that way, it means that there is literally no discretion by the department, right? You can't waive state laws. We've often talked about with sort of, you know, the background checks or other pieces. If it's a regulation, there's typically, you know, variances or language in that allows a very senior level leader, right, with discretion to waive that. That's just not true for anything that's in code or in budget. And so I say that to you as advisory body. Obviously, we talked a lot about the commission and its role on that, but that is important then that as you think about your work with legislators, in addition to your advising of the board, is to get folks to pay attention to that very, very important section of the budget, because it's not just the top line dollar amounts that we're really excited about, as I talked about earlier, but it also has real impact on the work of the 3,000 providers that take child care subsidy, you know, the hundreds of providers that participate in mixed delivery, the 9 ready regions, right, in a way that it did 3 years ago, right? And so I just want to kind of clarify as all this, you know, blurs together, but that is a really distinctive and requires a different type of advocacy and observation, right? Because things that are in the budget don't necessarily go to committee hearings, right? It's sort of there's sort of, it's amendments, and there's the governor's budget, and there's amendments, and then there's the kind of conference, and sort of just thinking through how that looks different than, say, legislation. As you'll just hear, as I'll go quickly through it, this was a much meatier debate than the things that were pertaining to legislation and that are coming out of this session as well as early childhood. Next slide, please. Want to make sure everybody's aware. I know I made reference to this in terms of the enactment language, but Senate Bill 1084 did go through both chambers and was signed by the governor. And this creates a new license exemption for school-age childcare providers that meet these certain conditions. Key focus is that they are affiliated with a national organization that has established health and safety standards. So think about your YMCA or your Boys and Girls Club. And then for those of you familiar with it, there's an entire section of our code, all sorts of exemptions that then set different parameters, different expectations on filing with the department. And this adds this exemption to a host of others. It will go into effect. We can move to the next slide, please. On July 1st, unlike some of the other exemptions, these folks who are exempt under this classification will not have to file with the department. And so that'll be a bit of a shift there in terms of even the department's awareness of them. But there should not be an access impact, so that you're license exempt, you are able to participate in child care subsidy if you're currently licensed. You should stay licensed until we're clear on how to make sure that you can continue subsidy. And then if you want to continue to receive subsidy, what you have to do is comply with federal requirements around health and safety. So it means for a subset of these school age providers, some will be entirely exempt, some will be license exempt, but take subsidy, and so subject to some health and safety inspection, and some may decide to stay licensed. It's always an option to be licensed as the easiest way to receive their child care subsidy. The other laws that were passed, House Bill 1833 establishes a 4-year pilot program to support small family day homes in Ready Region Chesapeake Bay. It provides funding to Ready Region to hire a navigator, and provides an incentive as family day homes come online and become licensed, regulated, and participate in DQB5. So just an effort to support the continuing to sort of address supply issues, particularly focus on family childcare. And if you were to talk with the legislators, you would also note some of the legislative intent around supporting military families and the need for non-traditional hours. And then speaking of military families, there's also House Bill 1685, which creates an exclusion. So our programs that only take military funding can be excluded from the definition of publicly funded provider and therefore not be required to participate in BQB 5. And the criteria here is you have to the military childcare can be the only source of public funding. So if you receive childcare subsidy, if you receive Head Start, you still have to participate in BQB 5, and that you're under DoD by one of theirs. DoD approved national accrediting bodies. The key thing to understand here is looks like a small number of programs in that while the state advocated to be broadly inclusive of all publicly funded programs, the state and the state's attorneys were advised that this was in conflict with federal law and would create quite a constitutional challenge. And so the answer was the compromise as included in bipartisan compromise as included in House Bill 16. All right, before jumping into a couple of logistical membership updates, we just wanted to make sure, I'll turn it back to Becca to just give you an update on what we know about waitlists. And so I think we started with this high of this historic investment. I think we know, and I look at Cheryl and Clark and providers across the room that, there are still lots of children on wait lists, lots of households grappling with the impossible. How do I come up with, over $1,000 or $1,500 a month to pay for childcare when that's not my take home? Represent that if I'm working in a lower or minimum wage job. I just wanted to make sure that you knew walking out of here where we are on the wait list and the need to continue to recognize that there's still significant unmet demand. Heard it come up in some of the gubernatorial campaigns. You've seen some media about this, but we still have a wait list going into FY26, and that will be a challenge for the commission and for the 2026 General Assembly.
So as I spoke to earlier, we talked a little bit about these policy shifts that were intended to bring, some children off of the wait list. As of June 1st, we're actually closer to 50,000 children that are waiting to be served. We have just shy of 13,000 children that are currently waiting for services in the subsidy program. Basically, that means that even with the increase in slots that are available for FY26, we're gonna have somewhere in the ballpark of like for every 5 slots that we have available, we still have another kid that's waiting to be served, right? So the shift or the unmet demand here is significant. And for mixed delivery, we've got just shy of 2,000 kids that are waiting to be served. We've got, again, we have some additional slots that are available through mixed delivery with those policy shifts. However, we still are just at 2,600 slots for mixed delivery, and so we're looking at more like for every 2 slots that we have in mixed delivery, there's a child that is waiting to be served. So there's just significant unmet demand around the state, and a disproportionate share of that are young kids, and actually. That number of kids that are birth to 5 on the subsidy wait list should be 7,886. We didn't catch an update when we were shifting from the May numbers to the June numbers here. And you can see that in mixed delivery, in particular, the number of kids that are waiting for services are disproportionately in toddlers. I know that goes to the point that Vivian made earlier about the need for toddler care across the state. And so this chart shows the sort of the arc of waitlist counts over the course of this past fiscal year. The blue line is the total waitlist count, and the orange line is the count of kids that are birth to 5. You can see that there was this kind of really rapid period of growth, whether you're talking about the total waitlist or the birth to 5 waitlist. Between July and December, where the number of kids on the waitlist increased by over 200%. And then it is kind of, plateaued. When we still see very incremental increases over the course of the last lists. There was a little dip in the spring, and then it's ticking back up again as largely school-age kids are coming onto the wait list for summer services. But you will notice that there's been sort of a widening gap in the kind of share of kids that are birth to 5 that are on the wait list, right? As the wait growing, the count of birth to 5 kids that are on that is staying pretty stable. And that's because the way that we have the wait list structured and the priority group structured is that kids or families that have at least one child birth to 5 are prioritized for slots when they become available. If there's a school age child in that family, they're kind of they hold the same priority as the birth to 5 families. The priority sits with the family, not with the child. And we estimate that in that sort of tier 1 group, 1 out of every 4 kids is a school age child. Again, this just, really shows that we continue to see, significant unmet demand. This is likely still an underrepresentation of actual demand, because we know that as soon as families kind of catch wind of the fact that there are wait lists and that it takes a long time to get off of them, they're less likely to put their names on the list. We've got a lot of work to do to kind of understand these better. We're planning to do a survey of families on the wait list for childcare subsidy services with our partners at UVA to better understand what are the circumstances of those that were on the wait list but moved into the program. What are the circumstances of those that are still waiting, and what happened to those that fell off the wait list for one reason or another. A lot more for us to learn here. These numbers are definitely, they remain concerning despite the plateau. We are still seeing that kind of incremental tick, and we'll be monitoring this really closely over the course of the next fiscal year.
Yeah, a few kind of important points for this body to know. So I think the first of which is that there's pretty persistent demand here. I should note that although there is turnover, that something like less than 1% of the slots of the folks who leave the waitlist any month are going to be served. Roughly 10% of the churn is folks who just give up on the waitlist. And so even these numbers reflect more folks coming in, because there's a pretty significant departure each month of people who just say, I can't wait this, wait this out. Some of these folks have been on, right? These are 100 and, they're jurisdictional wait lists. So, there's some people who've been on all year, and it's hard for us to kind of quantify the length of that we've been asked by elected officials and others. And that really depends on, which community you're in and how much this is turning over. But I would say the other thing that we've come across, remember that we were able to reallocate some unused funds from DPI and turn them into childcare vouchers, but there's only but so many cases that can be processed from the wait list in any given month, right? And that varies again by local office and where there's capacity. But you put another way, even though we're adding 4,000 plus slots, as of July 1st, it's not like they can immediately start care on July 2nd, right? There's a processing cost in terms of maintaining a wait list, staying in contact. One of the really big issues, as you might imagine, is I get in contact with you and I have to give you enough time. Like, I can't contact Vivian and Jen and Daryl and say, you'd be like, whoever gets, calls me back, hits me up, like, it's the slot, right? So that ends up being, a lot of inefficiency around a wait list. I also know, I heard from Cheryl, I've heard from some of Clark's colleagues, like, it's really tough for providers too, because they have site-based wait list, and somebody will come up and say, but I'm on the wait list for subsidy, and they have to be passed over, and then they say, I get the subsidy, and then sort of this back and forth that creates a lot of friction in the system as well. We continue to monitor the number of vendors and figure out how to support them, but that is, the longer that the bigger that these wait lists grow and persist, it does, we think we're starting to see some signs that it then has an impact if we want to participate and childcare subsidy and the overall supply and are monitoring that. And that we have, there's next, in this month, kind of 12 state months of evidence here. I do want to note, I can talk a little bit about this, but we have moved over some more folks from DSS to DOE. We'll be supporting providers in the upcoming year. And so as we really grapple with, in addition to surveys that Becca mentioned around families and understanding their impact, I think we're also really looking at kind of the broader supply and the kind of private provider. We have more programs. We're just starting to crunch the numbers of VQP5 and look forward to bringing those results this fall, but we have more folks participating this year than we have programs that are taking subsidies, but there's some risk that wait lists will jeopardize the economic proposition that is, cost quality rates plus reasonable expectations for health, safety, and learning. And we're going to monitor that hopefully improve the quality of services to our providers as a way to sort of hopefully, reduce the risk of losing our private providers who want to take public dollars, but it feels much more in jeopardy. We will get charged like this than did maybe when we had very historic growth. I could talk briefly about who's doing this and continuing.
Yes, yes, yeah. I had to process that. Yes,
Yes.
last part of that sentence. We have a group of 9 staff that are transferring from social services to the Department of Education. And actually yesterday was their first day as DOE employees. 7 of them are part of what you all may know as the vendor relations team at the Department of Social Services. We are kind of rebranding them here as subsidy provider services. And they're going to be joining a new office here at the DOE that's going to be led by Alex, the Office of Early Childhood Public-Private Provider Services, which is a mouthful, and we'll eventually come up with a catchy acronym that rolled off the tongue a little easier than that does. But they will be joining the team of regional navigators that Alex is currently leading. And some of you may have had the privilege of being able to engage with a navigator in your community or have been able to connect colleagues or other providers to a navigator in your community. But they're a team of just fantastic folks that are really kind of in communities on the ground, trying to, hand in hand work with providers who need a little bit of extra assistance in order to become publicly funded or remain publicly funded. And as we have really firmed up, our sort of subsidy focused teams work with Jeff and his team and have gotten kind of even better through lines of communication there. We thought it was really important that we bring those folks that are also kind of directly interfacing with our subsidy providers at DSS under the same roof. It just makes us more efficient, ensures we're all speaking with the same voice. And so we're really excited to be able to kind of build out this vision for supporting those privately operated, publicly funded sites across the state. We also have 2 team members that are joining the DOE from the team that's known as Payment Accuracy. They're in charge of a specific federally required report that looks at how well are we adhering to our own eligibility policies when we're determining eligibility for families. So they're going to be situated in an Office of Child Care Subsidy Program Operations that's much more focused on the sort of family-facing case management side of the subsidy program.
So, then busy session. A lot in the budget space, continue to be really important. Certainly, the commission will be the body responsible for that. But in response, you see, a real effort to bring this body detailed information to also understand that the DOE structure continues to evolve to make sure that we're thinking about this portfolio of publicly funded private providers and staying in compliance with all federal expectations, also really thinking about how we organize ourselves to support the needs of Virginia providers, Virginia educators, Virginia families, and most importantly, Virginia kids. We've got some legislation we got to put in place as of July 1st, although you might feel less of that effect than the broader set of policy shifts that are included in the budget. And then just And so if you're getting emails about the out-of-school time work group, you know, there's big detail about the commission. We can make sure that we send you all the commission details as well, but just a ton of stakeholder activity. And, you know, I would say, and again, reflecting over the broader arc here of just, you know, where the state invests as much as Virginia has, you know, childhood, it just lends itself to a lot more ownership, right? And so if you were to go and talk with Virginia legislators, when I first arrived in 2018, most people were like, what? Like, talk about what? Like, you know, like, okay, that's a federal program, you know, there's very little versus now where there's just a really significant bipartisan sense of ownership of Virginia's child care subsidy program. And so I think that's a positive. But we remain very nervous and work with our partners at VCF, our Ready Regions, our UVA research partners, and all of our private providers to figure out how do we kind of move forward, knowing that we have see in front of you some real challenges around supporting supply, supporting growth, supporting economic development and Virginia economies if we are dealing with thousands and thousands of kids who cannot access the resources, whose families cannot otherwise afford quality childcare, and we imagine this will be an important issue as Virginia faces a gubernatorial election to go in that space. Any questions about budget, legislation shifts? A lot of sort of that is all that is finalized to come out of, and part of it, and why are we talking about this now? When the General Assembly ended in February, we didn't have a budget until the middle of May. So that's why this has been a little delayed relative to the official end of the General Assembly, but Virginia's new habit of dragging that out to the spring and summer months.
I mean, if they do is have to do a special session that in any way impacts funding for childcare, then we'll just.
Yes, that's a great question. Yeah, so what Jen is referencing to is there was, particularly in February, there was a lot of a sense of federal uncertainty, and I know Daryl spoke to this earlier. And so the General Assembly basically sort of said that they're going to do a September special session, which they will look at kind of the impact, whether it is some of the unemployment of federal workers, and what that means for, you know, for Virginia and Virginia's. A lot of our dollars, state general fund dollars, come from payroll tax, or if there are other programs that are struck, whether that's a Medicaid impact, a Head Start impact, that there is a session on the books for September, which is highly unusual, to be able to provide an opportunity for the GA to come together. I think a lot remains to be seen in terms of what they recover, but yes, Jen, we will be monitoring that carefully and closely in terms of mid-year impact. I would also note if you go to July 1st, and sort of allude to in this, but just to be explicit, I know we had a conversation last year, all of these dollars have been allocated. I mean, this is, I should have said this explicitly in the slides. We used every dollar. We like even the last, we even go back and forth again, that last, you know, those last checks that go out, as Cheryl Clark knows, we go to bi-weekly for our private provider childcare subsidy program, but every single BPI dollar, basically every dollar, childcare subsidy dollar was used for early childhood this year. And that in itself, just the amount of work in partnership with Department of Social Services, the local offices, our 9 Ready Regions, and all of the private providers. And there's just so much more infrastructure at the department and with partners now to make sure that these dollars turn into slots and that dollars do not get reverted to general fund dollars, but that actually serve kids. And that's just so morally important when you stare at these wait lists in front of you. So we feel as a system, you know, we've really come a long way. Huge thanks to BCF and the Ready Regions, providers taking this delivery, around getting this infrastructure in place, getting that funding flexibility so that we can maximize every dollar. And so when we look at this chart, I'm sure we'll be asked to present it to legislators in the fall, and can say with confidence that we didn't leave dollars on the table in fiscal year 2025 and leave kids on wait lists. We truly put every dollar towards slots, but we still have additional unmet demand. Yeah, it's really the team, and I'm like, folks, I get like a little, you know, update every 2 weeks when dollars go out. It is incredibly complicated in terms of the childcare subsidy, right number of kids, right number of dollars. But our 120 offices have just done just a really big lift and so many changes. Our school divisions that take BPI, our community partners, our ready regions on mixed delivery. So if there's any aspect of the work, there's two aspects of the work that truly take the village. It's getting all those observations done. We have great numbers there, like 99.9% of observations done this spring, 31,000 statewide, and then getting these dollars out. And it truly, we're in every city and county. It takes every one of those public and private partners to get those observations done and get those dollars out. I'm just the lucky one who gets to present it. The work and thanks goes to everybody out there who's doing this work. All right, before we wrap, let's do some important membership updates. I'd like to finally push this one off because I don't want to say goodbye to Vivian and Sandy. But let me turn it back to Becca.
Sure. So I think as you all know, we instituted a couple years ago now some kind of staggered terms for ECAP members. Many of you were part of our kind of inaugural committee, and everybody came on board at the same time, and it was brought to our attention that was going to be really terrible for us to re-recruit all 20 some odd of you every 3 years. And so it was encouraged that we do a little bit of a staggering here. And so we do have 2 members that are rolling off the committee. This is their last meeting, Sandy and Vivian. And we are so grateful to both of you for your participation and your contributions to the committee over the last several years. So before we talk about our reappointed members, let's give those folks a round. I don't think either of them are going far, and I think we'll continue to hear from them. But they won't be joining us for these meetings on a regular basis. We have 4 members that did choose to or applied to remain on for a second term. Jen Parrish, Clark Anders, Daryl Turner, and Kia Foster Steen. So we're really glad to have the 4 of you back and are excited for another 3 years with you all. And then Chelsea, we'll jump ahead. We're also looking forward to welcoming 4 new members to the committee when we meet next. We have Lisa Garrick, who's going to be taking Sandy's role as the representative for advocacy or service organizations for children with disabilities. Jessica Lehman, who is filling the vacant space for Head Start sites that are not school-based. January, I need the pronunciation of her last name, who is joining for the Head Start school-based sites. And then Jerron Vanderhall, who is representing nonprofit early childhood and care and education advocacy organizations. And we actually had the pleasure of meeting Jerron at joined the OST work group. So got a little preview introduction to him there. So we're really excited to welcome these 4 folks. For those of you that are going to be back with us at our next meeting, we'll probably do a brief icebreakery, get to know you sort of activity, just so that everyone can reintroduce themselves. And for those of you that won't be joining us again, we'll miss you. And I really look forward to this service.
If it's crossing our time.
Yeah. Out there, I just fortunately back to my chair.
Okay, a lot of information today. Thank you, Jen, Jeff, Becky, for all of your presentations. Any other comments, questions? Is there a motion to adjourn today's meeting?
Make that motion.
Is there a second? Those in favor to adjourn, please say aye.
Aye.
So moved. Thank you.
Yeah.
Yep.